Welcome to the Rimworld mod rundown. We'll be taking a quick look at what you can expect to see from Vanilla Expanded Plants and Cooking. For starters, you'll need to own the additional workshop content, Vanilla Expanded Framework, and Harmony. Now, that intro is a bit of a lie. We're not just going over cooking and plants. This rundown also includes the Vanilla Expanded add-ons for stews, sushi, brewing, coffee and tea, fishing, fishing treasures, more plants, mushrooms, succulents, food variety expanded, and a handful of useful mods to pair alongside this chunk of content in the form of smart farming, gardens, and sourced meals and bakes. So why combine all of these mods together for a single video? Simple. Who here would honestly want to watch a video just on plants? Sure, there's a lot of different crops and fancy new ways to pretty up your landscape, but for the vast majority of players out there, the idea of sowing anything besides rice, devil strand and heel root is basically unfathomable. And you're going to need some of these additions to produce the recipes in Vanilla Cooking Expanded. So I'd be driven slightly insane releasing a video that relied on interactions from another mod that I hadn't also covered. Fair warning as well, this is 100% a second monitor or background video, and I don't blame you for doing that. It isn't exactly going to be the most bombastic thing to watch unless you've got a fascination with kitchen layouts, crop rotations, or watching colonists prepare meals. Let's start by saying what's new in the standard grow zone then. We're going to open the menu, and okay, we're going to need to put Dub's Mint menus on for this rundown, or it's going to be a nightmare to show. That's better. Dubs is also fantastic because it shows at the very top the mod source for these plants. So even though I'm covering them all in one big lump, if you're after specifics and don't want to install quite so much bloat, you can pick out the individual mods that interest you. Whilst the majority of crops are going to be available to you right away, there are a couple of research projects hiding some extra options. You'll have new trees in tree sowing, and the cosmetics from the Succulents add-on will be in its own sowing research. You're also going to find that a lot of these cosmetic plants are going to be showing up in the relevant biomes as standard too. So simply by having these mods active, even if you aren't growing the plants yourself, you're going to be increasing the diversity in your game. So this mod is confirmed woke.
Guess what? Fucking pronouns!
That's standard grow zone then. And yes, we're going to get into why I'm calling this a standard grow zone shortly. It's going to have one new source of wood, 36 new crops, 2 new medical plants, 11 new aesthetically pleasing options, and 13 more supplementary plants, as well as a variable splattering of fruit trees based on the biome that you're growing in, with 13 trees in total and each biome supporting approximately 6 or 7 of them. The main draw of using the Vanilla Plants Expanded series is the vast array of individual bonuses that each plant comes with. So going through individual yields, temperatures, fertility requirements and growing times is just mad overkill. You can easily see them on the plants as they're cycling through the screen on that right hand side, and more important parts are listed in the text description of the plants themselves. You'll have access to mechanics like dual crops for oats and barley that split into multiple yields rather than a single one, or the companion crops of carrots and green beans, with a 10x10 grow zone of these providing a 30% speed boost to the other, allowing for an easy pairing that provides a fantastic haul. There are crops that lean heavily into your tile's average temperature, or where you've settled on the world map, like cold-loving Brussels, toxic-resistant cabbages, tropical cassava that thrive in fog, super hot eggplants that love being inside something warm, peas that grow best in the rain, resulting in map-wide golden showers, soybeans that demand optimal, even temperatures, similar to what colonists do best in, and sunflowers that like to be right along the equator. Then you've got even more specific crops, like storage cluttering chickpeas, highly nutritious pineapples, easily harvested pumpkins, bell peppers that come with variable harvests, lettuce that needs to be shaded, but outdoors, tomatoes that have multiple harvests so you don't rip up the entire vine, and peanuts that are scattered when planted, allowing vast fields to be sown extremely quickly. Whilst you can definitely go the route of min-max with these plants if you really wanted to, what it makes for is beautiful, interesting and more thematic grow zones around your colony, so you can better tailor the crops in your fields to match the biome that you're in and the diet that you'd ideally be feeding your colonists. Whilst it makes no mechanical difference in vanilla that your pawns are eating chicken and rice for every single meal, like a gym bro focused on getting pure gains at the expense of any flavour, it's nice to see something a little different in your freezer and fields from time to time. It's why it makes sense to have the fruit trees split across different biomes. So if you do choose to make use of them with their unique growing conditions and effects, it's likely to be a little bit different on a colony by colony basis, provided you actually land somewhere different from time to time. I'm well aware some of you out there believe and firmly stand by temperate forest, perma-summer as the only acceptable landing site.
I'll have a
temperate forest.
How original.
With a 40-60 split.
Daring today, aren't we?
This is also where vanilla food variety expanded comes to help, giving you an incentive of a mood boost, or rather the risk of suffering a debuff, based on the diversity of ingredients and foodstuffs your colonists are consuming. You can go about diversifying a colonist diet in two ways, either by providing a variety of different meals, or by mixing up the ingredients. Of course, doing both is the best solution, but it may not always be a viable option depending on the climate or the source of your meals, such as if you're relying on a paste dispenser. Whilst the mod itself does have options you can tweak to increase or decrease the amount of variety that it's tracking, by default it's going to be calculated over the last 7 sources. So the past 7 meals or ingredients are going to be compared against each other for variety. If you're a total savage and the last 7 dinner times were just a handful of raw berries, you're likely going to notice that your colonist has a -5 mood debuff, due to a complete absence of any joy in their life, and they're also shitting through the eye of a needle. If you can manage to mix this up a little, maybe turning some of those berries into a simple meal, or even cooking a bit of raw meat to eat instead, you'll see that variety meter start to creep up. And between 31 and 59% satisfaction, it's going to provide no impact. So no more debuff, but no positive either. Eventually, when they've finally got some crops in the ground, a little bit of rice, some carrots and beans, a few different animals butchered up and the meat stored safely in a freezer, with all of these being made into different dishes, you'll be well up in that 60 to 100% variety range, with it providing a lovely +5 mood buff on top of any existing meal bonuses. Again, the mod has an option to offset this mood bonus, or debuff, if you'd like it to be more or less severe. The last part of variety comes in with colonists now having favourite foodstuffs as well, which, if consumed, will count as 2 ingredients for the sake of variety, making it much easier to satisfy that colonist needs. These favourite foods can also be expanded upon, with recipe books now appearing in the world as either a quest reward or being sold by traders. These books will add the named ingredient or meal to the colonist's favourite food list when read, with the book then being destroyed after it's used. So you can't make everybody in the colony absolutely love the same food and totally trivialise the system. Just make sure people are wearing oven gloves when they turn that final page.
This message will self-destruct.
Of course, it isn't always about plants for food. You're going to need some of them to make condiments from vanilla cooking expanded, or to brew different alcohols and drinks, maybe even a few different drugs entirely. This is why you've got things like mint, allspice, tobacco, tea grass, and coffee. Of course, we're not going to get into recipes just yet, just know that they're available to all colonists with no need for further research. So you've got very easy access to a lot of potential drug options from the get-go when using these mods. No more heavily leaning into psychoid early on with every colony. Outside of the standard grow zone, Plants Expanded also branches out into sand, aquatic, and mushroom grow zones. These can be placed where their names would suggest, with the mushroom grow zone essentially working like a filter for a standard grow zone, if you want to keep the menu cleaner when living inside of a mountain base. There's nothing in that menu that you will not find in a standard grow zone. The sand grow zone is there to help in the desert or arid climate, offering the ability to plant something even if it has an extremely long time requirement or is hamstrung in its yield compared to a normal crop. You have rye for access to flour, melons, cucumbers and butternut squash, and coconuts as well. Then you've also got aloe vera for herbal medicine, so you're still going to need to scavenge for cloth and leather scraps where possible, but you aren't quite as screwed as you would be on a desert tile normally. The aquatic grow zone will work in marshes or shallow water. You won't be able to grow anything in salt water as there's no options for things like kelp or algae farms. This grow zone might give you an option on an extremely frigid map, or a rocky plain with a river flowing through it. Again, like the sand grow zone, you're sacrificing yield and time to be able to grow something in a normally non-viable terrain type, with these zones offering the choice between watercress, water chestnuts, taro root or lotus seeds. Now, grow zones aren't the only place that you can plant things, and not only that, I'd previously hopped over going into detail about the mushroom grow zone to tie it in with this. Some of the new things you can grow are in plant pots, and they have unique effects, and some of the mushrooms are very unique indeed. Inside your plant pots, you've obviously got the standard rose and daylily, as well as now also being able to cultivate mint, red caps, glow caps, canola plants, and bearberry bushes from the standard grow zones. So if you don't want to go the route of using sand or aquatic grow zones in a certain biome, you could still build plant pots and use them as a scuffed basin to grow yourself some bearberries. The glow cap is a new mushroom that has a nice straightforward effect of providing a small amount of light whilst it grows, with it being able to be consumed when it's fully grown. The thermoregulus is an extremely cheeky addition that does the job of both a cooler and a heater, with it being able to survive when exposed to light too. This saves you a simply ridiculous amount of power and materials inside a complex style base or a mountainside, as spending just 20 wood on a plant pot for one of these in every room will easily manage the temperature regulation across the majority of your base, outside of heat waves or cold snaps of course. The Lullabloom gives you an early option to double up your bedside adornments, with an end table on one side and this on the other, providing an additional 0.02 comfort and immunity to the disturbed sleep debuff, making it especially useful if you're living in a barracks style of accommodation, or have a particularly inconsiderate spouse that stumbles home at 3 AM. So outside of our plant pots, we have more fancy mushrooms to explore. Let's assume you're living a tunneler lifestyle and want to exist purely with shroomies, just for the vibes. Timber caps provide you with wood, being more accessible than timber shrooms to plant, similar to how fiber corn works rather than growing an entire tree. Alongside your nutrifungus, you can also grow cave moss, which will work like kibble, allowing you to more easily look after any animals in the deep dark places of the earth. Bioseps give you access to grow a meaty fungus, so you've got both ingredient needs covered without ever needing to leave the safety of your mountain home. You're just going to need to get a little bit creative with how and where they're planted, as they do require corpse bile seeping into the ground around them to thrive, so you actually want rotting corpses in your base. Delightful. You have two options for your medicine production, with the heel truffle leaning towards that corpse-fed approach, requiring rot stink gas to be present in order to grow. Of course, there might be something else you could grow to aid this, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. The heel shroom is much more straightforward, requiring more time and skill to cultivate. Like most mushrooms, this is going to shit the bed if it's exposed to light, so you want a nice dark cave, well out of the way and left alone, growing in peace. The red cap we already know about. It's pretty. Zap caps are pretty funky, if a little bit odd. At full maturity, these produce 10 watts of power each, requiring a power conduit to be built underneath them to make use of the power. The issue here is that they take a very long time to reach maturity, don't exactly have an amazing lifespan, plus they die if they're exposed to light, and make any short circuit explosions significantly more volatile. So they're useful for charging emergency batteries, and that's about it. Trying to meaningfully run anything on these mushrooms is going to be difficult at best and downright infuriating at worst. The tincturum is here to give you a way to dye your clothing without needing to go above ground, and stinker mushrooms can work as a foodstuff, but that isn't their primary purpose, as they passively barf out rot stink to the surrounding tiles, meaning the amount of stinkers that you need to supply an area with the gas is important, as once this starts getting out of control and flooding your base with noxious fumes, you're going to despise having to deal with the resulting lung rot cases by being a little overzealous in your planting. You also need to exercise caution when harvesting not only these stinkers but also any heel truffles you planted nearby them, as too long spent in the vomitorium will not end well. Mycothread mushrooms exist to help you with having access to fabric, with it being slightly worse than cloth in most aspects, a little bit more fragile, slightly less protected from damage and temperatures, and a bit uglier. Of course, if you want bright pink sofas and drapes, it's the best way to go, and in a pinch, you can always eat it. Glow caps we already know, so that just leaves bliss caps. These can be incredibly deceptive if you get a bunch of them from a cargo pod event and just throw them into meals, as they have a potent psychic sensitivity buff that comes with a severe consciousness and movement penalty. On the plus side, the colonist will be high as a kite, offering a fantastic mood buff from consuming meals made with bliss caps. Now, before we move away from plants and onto fishing, let's wrap it up with a couple of solid extra mods to make your farming and decoration a breeze. Smart Farming, which was originally an Owl Chemist mod, which is how you know it's going to be good, has a continued version that's been picked up by Ferris CG, who has supported many other Owl Chemist mods into 1.5. Smart Farming gives you much greater control over your grow zones via 4 new buttons, which are extremely helpful when you're managing such a large variety of crops, especially with some of them falling outside of your usual growing rules, such as still maturing over winter when other plants would have died. You'll have the option to cycle between forcing crops to be sown regardless of the time of year, setting it to a smart zone, which means fresh crops will not be sown if they cannot reach a minimum level of maturity before the seasons change. You can keep it working with vanilla rules, or you can set it to off entirely, allowing you to halt production of certain crops without needing to remove the zone and replace it down the line when you want it to resume growing. You're then able to prioritize crops in a similar way that you can manage your stockpiles, so things like your heel root or devil strand could be set to a higher level, making colonists ensure that they are sown and harvested first, rather than wasting time trying to plant more trees or tink. There's also an option for no petty jobs, which you can further configure in the mod options. This ensures that colonists aren't going out to the furthest of your fields and then planting a single bit of cotton. The final button you'll have is when multiple zones are selected, allowing you to combine multiple grow zones together rather than needing to delete one and then expand the other one out. You'll notice in the options menu that this mod is high in its level of configuration and interaction. You can tune it exactly as you need, with it automatically tagging blight or dying crops for harvest, setting harvest orders early if it knows plants won't survive the upcoming weather, as well as having other gizmos you can show or hide, such as the alignment option if you want trees or crops that need space around them to be planted in nice, neat lines, rather than that shotgun splatter approach all over the landscape. As well as all of this, it adds more details to the information panel in the bottom left too, displaying the growing period, exact size of the grow zone, soil fertility and potential nutrition offered by the harvest, with how long that's expected to last in the colony. Handy, right? No more planting what you think is an acceptable field of potatoes only to find out that it barely covers you for a single week, or having so many that you're throwing thousands away because there simply isn't room in the freezer to contain the cataclysmic carbohydrate cache that's compounding colony cash. The other mod to mention is significantly more straightforward. Gardens gives you a zone that can be assigned to grow basically any plant that it finds you have installed. This will still follow the usual rules, so mushrooms will die if exposed to light and specific flowers will be more vulnerable to cooler or warmer temperatures. It's mainly here to give you far easier access to make a varied, beautiful flower bed for your base, between walkways or around the perimeter of houses for example, without needing to place multiple individual grow zones and assign them all different flowers. Now you can select which bits you like the look of, and your colonists will throw a handful of random seeds in the zone, eventually resulting in a beautiful assortment of colour.
Alright, gay.
So that's everything plant-based. Let's kick back a little bit with some fishing. Thankfully, this is super easy to cover. To get started, you're going to need to place down some zones for fishing to take place. In the mod options, you can set this to be as large or as small as you'd like, but the default is 25 tiles. When you place this zone, it's going to determine what kind of fish you have access to, with the mod including both freshwater and saltwater species, as well as those that live in normal, warm or cold climates. Very broadly speaking, you're going to find a greater assortment of small and medium fish in freshwater, with saltwater offering more towards the medium to large range. Fishing speed and proficiency is determined by the animal's skill, with it being easier for a lower skilled angler to catch small fish, as if you set them to try and catch something larger, they're going to be fighting with their rod for an absolute age, the curse of using a death grip for too many years. You're getting 25 types of fish, broken up into small, medium and large, with small fish offering next to no nutritional value at 0.01, so you'll be throwing dozens of them into a meal to make even a single portion. Medium fish work the same as the majority of meats or veggies, with a nutrition of 0.05, so these are very similar to what you'll be used to cooking with. Large fish offer 0.25 nutrition, so 2 large fish provide enough nutrition to make a simple meal. If you're doing a naked brutality start and have a starting colonist with a high enough animal skill, they'll be more than capable of sustaining themselves throughout the early game by getting their rod out and seeing what's biting, although at some point I'd recommend you craft them some clothing. The other mod you can add alongside fishing is the treasures expansion. This mod can be explained in about 2 sentences. How nice. With fishing treasures, set to its default value of 1%, you're occasionally going to hook interesting and handy items from a variety of mod sources. So if you're using fishing as a job to keep colonists from being idle, especially as it can be performed by those incapable of dumb labour, you're going to get something a little bit special from time to time as a reward for your approach to keeping the colony active.
What do you think's going to happen here, Bob? When I cast.
If you're using vanilla expanded ideology, the fishing culture meme will also allow you to fulfill the need for recreation whilst fishing and further increase the yield, as well as giving you some structures to automate your fishing endeavours as well. Not only that, it'll give you access to the sweet tooth meme, which leads us nicely into the next section, Cooking Expanded and the add-ons for it, Stews and Sushi. With Cooking Expanded, you're getting 6 research projects, with Stews adding 1 more, Sushi adding 1 more, and if you ended up using Vanilla Plants Expanded, more plants, you've got 1 more option in the form of vegetable milk. Now, these mods are undoubtedly a nightmare for people that dislike bloat, as all of Cooking Expanded is more around the theme, diversity, and interest that you can generate in your own colony rather than efficiency. So whilst it does offer some very min-max approaches to feeding your colony, the majority of parts in this mod are like an Ann Summers warehouse, all about the vibes. So before we dig into opening new research projects, let's first go over what you'll have access to by default if you're using this combination of mods. If you open the bills on your standard stove, you're going to see it has significantly more on offer than normal. You'll have new bakes and desserts at a simple, fine, lavish and gourmet quality, with there now also being an option to produce a gourmet meal too. Anything you make at gourmet quality is going to require condiments, which in themselves are an entire mechanic, so we'll cover those after wrapping up the basic additions that you're always going to have access to. Bakes are a food that requires flour, something you can harvest from either wheat, oat or barley. Bakes are really useful as they save on work, being made in either 2s or 8s, compared to the singles or quads from a normal meal bill, with them further saving on meats and vegetables by bulking out the meal with a floury base. So if you're on a tile that's tight on farmable land and local wildlife, this makes what little you can grow or hunt stretch just that little bit further, as long as you're splitting that arable land between growing flour and veg of course. Bakes fall into the same category as normal meals, and provide the same fine, lavish and gourmet buffs when consumed, unlike the next bit to cover, desserts. At its most basic, desserts can be made with any raw fruit, so simply throwing a handful of raw berries into a bowl, rather than eating them directly, is enough to elevate them to the point that it now provides a mood buff, because desserts operate on a slightly different approach than a normal meal. They're more there for the mood offset than nutrition. If you compare a simple dessert to a simple meal, that handful of berries would have provided 0.9 nutrition in a meal, with no mood buff, compared to a simple dessert that now only offers 0.2 nutrition, meaning it's actually lost 60% of its nutritional value in the process of cooking, with the upside being it's offering a very easily accessible mood buff. Not to mention, if you're using that sweet tooth meme from Ideology Expanded, your colony is going to require these treats to keep them happy. Anything above a simple dessert is then going to require chocolate, giving you a reason to actually research the cocoa tech for once. Because the dessert buffs are so easy to obtain and stack alongside other mood positives, you'll find they're less impactful than normal food, with simple desserts giving 1, fine give 2, lavish 5 and gourmet 7. Given that a fine dessert is costing the same in chocolate as a lavish one, with the lavish only needing a bit more fruit, it feels well worth going the extra mile to get that +5.
Started making it, had a breakdown. Bon appetit.
Alongside your stove, you'll now also have the sushi prep table. If you wanted to lean heavily into a fishing oriented colony, this is going to give you some fantastic recipes to make the best use of your catch. Whilst these dishes do provide an effect on the colony's health tab, as far as I know anyway, it provides nothing more than a little bit of flavour text. The biggest upside is that even a simple sushi meal provides a mood bonus. So for the early game, this is a very handy, accessible buff that uses ingredients you likely already have access to, rice and fish. The simple meals of Sushi and Nuramaki use them in different quantities, so depending on which one you have a larger stockpile of, you can base your meal choice around this and better stretch your raw ingredients. This style continues through fine, lavish and gourmet too. For anything above simple sushi, you're going to need an additional vegetable to make the recipe, And while yeah, you could just add more rice, don't be a savage, throw a bit of cucumber or carrot into it. Just like at the stove with a gourmet meal, the gourmet sushi is going to require a condiment too. An important thing to note with the mood buffs from a sushi meal is that they are different to a standard food buff. So if you have a normal meal for breakfast and then sushi for dinner, you get to rock 2 food buffs at once, making it extremely easy to keep people out of the danger zone. Some of you out there, the ones with the intermittent eye twitch, the questionable artwork on your office walls, and the mod list that got your IP flagged for a week, are now complaining, I can't use sushi, my colony eats people. Well, don't panic. If you go to the butcher table, you're going to see a new option to turn human meat into quote unquote surimi. This allows you to make sushi dishes that satisfy a cannibal colony's needs, so the sushi mod isn't totally useless if you don't fish either. It opens up the possibility of adding some variety to your diet with long pork.
What is the charge? Eating a meal? A succulent Chinese meal?
That is everything you're going to have, as standard. So now we've actually got some research projects to cover. Given that we're on the topic of sushi, let's go into soybean fermentation first, which also leads us very nicely into covering condiments. The soy sauce fermenter is the building that this research is going to unlock, costing just 30 steel and 10 wood to make. Whilst there is a quality mechanic tied to soy sauce, you probably won't give a crap about it. Awful quality will provide the same buff as legendary, without needing to ferment it for literal years. So you can safely set the auto quality to awful and then stuff it full of soybeans and just start the process, with it producing 15 bottles of soy after 8 days, so 15 gourmet meals worth. That means if you want colonists eating a gourmet meal every time they're hungry, you would need one of these per colonist to do it purely with soy sauce, in order to produce enough to meet that need. It gets pretty expensive pretty quickly. The only thing that changes by leaving the sauce in this fermentation process any longer is the quality. You aren't going to be getting any more bottles by waiting, with the legendary sauce being 10 times more expensive than an awful one, but it provides exactly the same bonus. So save yourself some wealth and lean into embracing terrible quality soy. Now, what's the deal with condiments anyway? Each one you can use isn't just an ingredient. Like, if you were to make a meal with beef, pork, donkey or cat meat, it results in the same output, but condiments provide a specific buff to the gourmet meal that they're used in. Soy sauce nets you a +5 mood buff for the salty, umami sweet perfection, and a 5% bonus to blood filtration and blood pumping. If you used Cooking Expanded way back in the day and hated it because of things like high blood pressure and diabetes that was caused by excessive or unhealthy diets, you'll be happy to hear that these things no longer exist. Now you can eat meal after meal that's seasoned like a Bronze League of Legends player and not worry about a heart condition because you're constantly consuming a lethal amount of salt. So that's the basic idea of your condiments anyway. Only makes sense to unlock the food condiment tech and go through what else we have access to. That gets you the condiment prep table, which is where the majority of these options are made. So let's run through them all really quickly with the ingredients required and the bonus provided. You've got salt. This can either be produced by grinding down an entire stone chunk or by using 20 stone blocks, resulting in 5 sprinklings. Because salt is one of the easiest condiments to get your hands on, as you might expect, it has a very simple buff too, granting just +3 mood for 12 hours. Agave nectar only needs 10 agave fruit to produce 10 bottles, with each drizzle of this nectar granting a tiny +1 mood buff and a more impactful 15% immunity gain speed for 12 hours. Because this buff is added as a health condition, it will still be hampered by things like weak immunity genes, so it's counted before those debuffs are applied, but it will help in bringing certain xenotypes closer to having a standard immunity value. 10 insect jelly is going to get you 10 jars of preserves. This is another really simple buff, providing a nice +6 to mood, as it's a little bit harder to get your hands on insect jelly compared to those rocks for salt. Mayo is going to need 5 eggs to make and produces 10 bottles of legally different, not at all Hellmann's real mayonnaise. Like the agave, this gives a tiny +1 bonus to mood, but you're eating it for the health offset, as it lowers hunger rate by 15%, making your expensive gourmet meals get that little bit more bang for their buck and keeping colonist bellies full just a bit longer. Smoked leaf butter needs 10 milk and 10 smoked leaf to produce 5 sticks. This can then be melted into a gourmet meal to provide the same effect as smoking a joint, which also works in satisfying a stoner's need or keeping a high life colony happy. You just maybe don't want people operating heavy machinery or doing surgery after eating their smoke leaf seasoned beef Wellington. Chocolate sauce can be made by melting 10 chocolate bars, producing 5 bottles that can be drizzled over meals, because who doesn't like cod and sunflower seeds in a chocolate sauce? This falls into that easy to obtain category of buff, so it only provides +4 to mood. Luciferium powder can be made using 10 luciferium, granting you 5 stacks of a finer grind that's better suited for cooking or dressing a meal. The great thing about luciferium powder is that you get a neutered version of the buff without developing an addiction. Because this isn't as harsh as straight luciferium, however, you will not be able to satisfy an addiction by eating meals that have been made with it. You'll see a minor buff to all health stats by consuming this condiment, and a very slight reduction to any pain experienced. Go Juice stock is made by condensing down 10 juices of the good stuff into 5 perfectly shaped cubes, ready to plop into a sauce for a meal. The Go Juice stock works the same as the luciferium powder, providing a weaker version of the buff without any risk. Obviously, Go Juice is a bit less potent than the Devil's Bargain, providing a bonus to consciousness, sight, and movement, with a reduction to pain as well. Wake Up powder is more of the same, made by crushing up 10 pills to get 5 meals worth of seasoning. This will grant a bonus to consciousness, movement, global work speed, meditation gain, and lower tiredness to 95%. Worth mentioning that these 3 drug condiments are from Brewing Expanded, not Cooking Expanded, but this is why I'm covering all these mods together, because they blend together so seamlessly. Wasabi paste is made from one of the more difficult plants to grow, wasabi. It has a notoriously low yield, as well as a long growing time, and it suffers a penalty if it isn't also planted within close proximity to water. 10 raw wasabi is going to get you 5 paste, with a buff that raises consciousness and breathing by 5%, and improves minimum temperature tolerance by a whole 10 degrees. Great food for cold snaps. Again, you can tell how well these mods blend together, because that comes from the Sushi add-on. The ketchup, which is also legally distinct, needs 10 tomatoes to make 10 bottles, a solid return on this one. As we know from the other condiments that are simple to make, the buff's never going to be that mind-blowing, with this one being one of the weakest, offering just +2 mood for 12 hours, so even salt is superior to this condiment that's clearly made for children. Hot sauce, which looks oddly similar to a certain sriracha brand, needs 10 peppers and it'll make 10 bottles. That's 10 peppers from the pepper plant, not bell peppers. You're making spice, not salsa. This actually provides a mood debuff compared to other foods, split over Breath of a Dragon and Hurt So Good. On the upside, this lowers pain experience to 85% and grants 10 degrees of minimum temperature tolerance, which can stack with the wasabi buff too. You never know, it might save you during a particularly horrific cold snap. There are 3 other condiments that don't need any processing and can be grown and used straight away, in the form of mint, spices, and sugar. Mint is one of the nicest condiments to use as it can be grown in plant pots, providing a little bit of beauty and decoration whilst it grows, even if it does seem to grow behind the pot. The mint will provide a really small mood buff and 10% social impact, so whilst the buff isn't anything crazy, it's ridiculously easy to grow and stockpile. It's something you can passively accumulate in colonist bedrooms. If you grow some allspice, you can eventually harvest it for its easy condiment application too. These spices are another +1 buff because they're so simple to access, but they provide a 5% manipulation bonus, which many players likely value extremely highly, more so than a social impact buff. And that just leaves sugar, which grows on sugar cane, which has an extremely low yield for a very lengthy growing time. As sugar's a little bit more demanding to grow, it sees a slightly better mood buff, with the biggest upside being it has a massive 15% bonus to movement. And I'd say that's everything, but that isn't quite true. The final condiment is something you can't make yourself. You only find it as quest rewards, loot, or on exotic traders, and that is the digestible Resurrector nanites. These are an interesting proposition, providing only a single point of mood buff and a 12-hour effect that grants +1% manipulation, with the main upside being, if you die while this buff is active, you're brought back to life, instantly, which may be a blessing or a curse depending on how and where you died. Extremely useful to keep some dishes set aside that have used this as an ingredient, as you can preemptively stack a res on a colonist that's due to die from an illness or an infection, or do something even more cheeky, like get around a luciferium addiction reaching its conclusion. So that's your condiments, which is one of the deeper mechanics included with the cooking series, and this is where I'll add in a recommendation for the mod Sourced Meals and Bakes, which gives you the option to make meals that use condiments at every level of quality. It's no longer something only limited to gourmet dishes. So if you want to get stacks of easy things like salt or ketchup, you can now throw them into fine meals to push that mood buff a little bit further, without needing to spend hours cooking extremely involved or expensive meals every single day. And given that you're already going through the effort of adding in an extra step of work with your meals by crafting or growing condiments in the first place, it seems only fair. And suddenly I'm sure the use of sugarcane will rise dramatically when people realise how easy it is to have that 15% bonus movement active all the time on the entire colony. I'm well aware for some this may throw off the balance of what condiments were planned around originally, but it actually opens up the possibility of using them for a lot of colonies, especially if the cooking skill is somewhat lacking.
Hey?
Go on.
Yeah?
Finish it then.
Finish what?
What are you about to say?
You? What am I about to say?
Cook a mussel.
No, I haven't cooked one.
Right. Okay.
Right.
So shall I show you how to cook a mussel?
Oh, at last, thank you. Yes, please.
Right. Are you going to tone your voice down or are you
Yes.
going to shout like some dick?
I'll shout like some dick and then I'll calm down.
So let's cover another research that comes from the plant mods, as everything else after this is going to fall into cooking or brewing. So it puts a nice bow on the coverage of plants. That's going to be the vegetable milk extractor, costing just 75 steel and one component to build. This consumes 50 watts of power, so it's super lightweight. By using this machine, you're able to convert either rice, almonds, coconuts, oats, or soybeans into milk, at the cost of losing a significant chunk of its nutritional value along the way, as it's turning 50 units of food into 15, both with 0.05 nutrition. Of course, milk has some unique applications, and you might be in a biome that doesn't really support livestock or playing with an ideology that makes ranching animals particularly difficult. For some, this also gives an option to condense down that massive rice stockpile into a more manageable bucket of milk, in turn lowering colony wealth without simply throwing all the surplus away. Next, let's cover grilling. This requires smithing as a prerequisite because I honestly don't know. It's realistically no different to making a stove that you already have unlocked by default, so maybe you're cooking around 1,500 degrees Celsius. Grilling is a little more complex in terms of how you need to manage its storage and set up the builds to ensure that its food isn't being wasted. The grill itself costs 75 steel and 20 wood, with it needing to be refueled with fresh wood when used, like a fueled stove. You have simple, fine, lavish and gourmet grilled meals as you'd expect, and whilst a simple meal isn't going to provide any mood buff, all grilled foods adds an offset to your hunger rate, lowering it by 35%, meaning you can go a lot longer between meals if you're living off grilled food. The downside to eating only grilled food is that it cannot be frozen, or it loses that effect, becoming a ruined grill. So whilst these meals can still be eaten without penalty, they lose their major upside. To get the most out of these grilled meals, you need to keep their stored numbers relatively low to how much you'd normally be cooking with the safety of a freezer. But it does make it easy to stash them right inside the dining room at an ambient temperature, saving colonists a bit of legwork when they're hungry. It just becomes one of those little and often jobs that drags someone away every day to make a handful of new meals, rather than spending an entire day cooking to fill the freezer stockpile for the whole week. Now let's hop over to the stews module real quick, because stews work very similarly to soups, so we can cover both at the same time. The stew pot is basically a fueled version of the soup pot, which works on electricity. These work on a multi-stage cooking process that allows you to put in a little bit of work to get a very large return, as long as you're willing to wait. The stew pot itself only costs 50 steel and 20 wood to make, with it kicking out a significant amount of heat whilst it's in use, so either you want to build it outside in a warmer climate, preferably with an awning over the top of it so it stops any rain interfering with its fuel consumption, or you could build it indoors in a colder climate to keep a room nice and toasty warm, with it presumably smelling of delicious stew as well. To get the pot working, you're going to need to make a simple, fine or lavish stew at a campfire or a stove, so this building isn't completely replacing your kitchen setup. Once an uncooked stew of any quality has been made, it can be placed on the heater to bubble away for 2 days. That 20 fuel in the building should allow it to run for 6 days as standard, so long as it's not left completely exposed to the elements. It'll easily see the stew cooked to completion without any interruption. This will then become 10 stew, so you're getting slightly more portions from the ingredients that you used than you would have if you put it into creating standard meals at a stove. It also technically took less work to throw together the uncooked stew and then place it on the cooker, although it might have taken more movement or time overall depending on your setup. The soup works in an extremely similar way, with it also being able to support up to a gourmet quality dish. If you wanted to save yourself a few condiments by stretching them across multiple meals, this is the way to do it. The electric pot only needs 50 steel, 1 component, and it consumes 100 watts when in use. It also puts out a much more steady, stable heat, meaning it's easier to use indoors without drastically heating up the room. The only risk to this is solar flares or power cuts, as the produce spoils rapidly if the cooking process is interrupted. Just like the stews, soups come out in a stack of 10, so provided you've got the luxury of waiting 48 hours between meals being prepared and ready to eat, you'll be able to really stretch out your raw ingredients into high quality meals. The buffs from both stews and soups count as a standard meal, so you won't be able to stack the buffs from these alongside normal food. Of course, sushi is still an option if you do want to go that double up route.
Forced to subsist on a thin stew made of fish, vegetables, prawns, coconut milk, and 4 kinds of rice. I came close to madness trying to find it here in the States, but they just can't get the spices right.
How about another way to cook things then? Deep frying. This takes 75 steel, 20 chem fuel, and it needs 100 watts of power. It also needs refueling with fresh chem fuel from time to time, as you'll be swapping out the oil in the fryer baskets presumably, which means this fried food must taste like it was cooked in a diesel engine. You'll be able to deep fry meat, veggies, fish, and even prepared sushi. Now, deep fried food isn't exactly great. It's extremely quick to produce and super easy to absolutely flood a freezer with, but nutritionally it's a black hole. 20 meat becomes 4 deep fried meats, so that raw meat lost 80% of its value. Same with veggies and fish. The option to deep fry sushi is madness. You throw in 20 prepared sushi, which is 20 whole nutrition, not 20 0.05 bits of nutrition like it is with the other recipes, and then it spits out 20 bits of deep fried sushi that have 0.1 nutrition value. So you just lost 90% of the food by doing this. So you'd expect an upside to deep fried food, right? No, not really. It's quick, dirty, and it's got an easy mood buff for the most part, with all fried food being super quick to eat, similarly to pemmican, so if the colonist is hungry they grab a handful, stuff their face and get right back to work. This is an area that feels like it could use a little bit of love though. It's a total dead end for most foods. Maybe it'd benefit from some simple integration from the easier condiments. Salt, mayo, ketchup, hot sauce. That way you could season your fried snack and have much easier access to the simple mood buffing condiment options. Let's make something a little more nutritionally fulfilling then.
Cheese.
With cheese making unlocking the cheese press, this is super cheap to build at only 10 steel and 30 wood. Cheese works a little bit like soy sauce, only the quality actually matters when you're eating cheese. This is also one of those use cases for the vegetable milk extractor, as for example you could turn rice into milk, which could then be further processed into cheese. It does need 50 milk to start producing cheese, so you're going to need 200 rice to make enough milk for the press, and then get 25 cheese in return. But cheese itself is 3 times as nutritious as milk, so it does gain some of the value back through that process. A lot of ups and downs basically. The key takeaway for cheese being, you'll get a mood debuff for awful and poor quality stuff, with it progressively getting better at normal and above. You could use cheese as a trade good if you really wanted to, with it hitting $50 a piece at legendary quality. That's a lot of time for that milk to spend in the press, that extremely fragile, flammable, wooden cheese press. You never know though, it might be a good idea to get into the cheese selling business rather than hard drugs. They have a great profit. And if that doesn't work out, maybe it's just nacho calling. That just leaves canning from the Cooking Expanded research. This gets you the canning machine that needs 100 steel, 1 component, and 85 watts of power. The building is extremely fast working, taking raw ingredients like meat, produce, fruit, eggs or fish, and using a single steel to encase them in a tiny metal tomb, preventing the ingredient from spoiling regardless of temperature. This isn't intended to turn food into a meal though. It's here to make for easier transportation of raw food without risking it expiring, or to save space in your freezer by allowing you to stockpile tinned food somewhere else. These canned ingredients work just like normal meats or veggies in dishes, so if you do want to stockpile them and not use them in recipes, make sure they're unchecked in your standard cooking bills. Fortunately, anyone can use these cans as an emergency ration too, so presumably they're all made with ring pulls.
For God's sakes, you can pull the lid off your own can of pudding.
Fine, I will.
So all that's left to cover is the brewing mod and add-on. It's not like that's a small part of the mod though, with 3 research projects that all unlock a huge amount of potential options. We'll start by grabbing liquor brewing. This unlocks the casks and the mush to make the associated alcohols. What you'll find with Brewing Expanded is the sheer variety of barrels, stills, drums and casks that you're going to need to build to produce that wider variety of alcohol on offer. It's just going to chew through considerable space in your base. So if you do want to go the route of bootlegging, you want a good dedicated room for all of this production. Liquor brewing needs beer brewing to unlock, and you'll find that all of your mushes and mashes are going to be craftable at the brewery table. Beer brewing also unlocks a couple of bits too, so let's cover those. At your stove you'll now find tea and coffee. 25 coffee beans or 25 tea leaves will get you 5 cups of your preferred beverage. Tea is the safest option of the two, with it being a simple source of food consumption recreation. Having a cup of tea also provides a 5-hour buff, +3 to mood, lowering tiredness gain to 90% and increasing immunity gain speed by 15%. So tea is a fantastic and accessible option to keep on hand to help colonists with recovery in the early game, when you've not got access to any good meds or a stacked out hospital. A simple cup of tea is going to set everything right. Coffee on the other hand is here to produce lovely addictions across your colony, if you don't carefully monitor everyone's intake. Coffee is produced as a normal hot cup, but if stored in anything around a freezing temperature, it becomes iced coffee instead. Both of these drinks are identical in terms of their safe dose, minimum tolerance, high gain and fall. However, the iced coffee has a 1% addiction chance above 25 tolerance, compared to the standard cup's 0.5%. Both of these drinks offer a 5-hour +3 mood buff with 15% global learning factor and an offset to tiredness of 85%, with that buff being able to stack across hot and iced coffee. So if you're willing to have a colony full of jittery messes, you'll be flying through skill ups. Also off the back of beer brewing, you're going to have the option to make cider at your brewery. This can be made with apples, bananas, cherries, oranges, peaches, pears or plums, with 25 fruits resulting in 5 bottles of unfermented cider. This then needs to sit for 5 days in a warm, comfortable temperature to do its thing and become a tasty beverage. This is an extremely weak alcoholic drink, so it can't be UK cider, and it has 0 risk of addiction. Cider does still provide a small buff though, with the colonist being able to stack its duration infinitely by necking bottle after bottle. It sees pain lowered to 90% with a 2% hit to manipulation. It might just be enough in some cases to get a wimp back on their feet from a minor inconvenience. Not only that, you'll find lemonade at the brewery as well, so if you want to skip the fermentation step for your non-alcoholic drink, you can mix 25 lemons with 4 sugar and get an easy 20 bottles of this. Lemonade is really simple stuff, providing +3 mood for 5 hours, as well as being a pretty solid source of recreation and having twice the nutritional value of a bottle of cider. So keeping one of these on hand is very useful to provide a quick hit to the food bar and keep a colonist cheerful while they're stood waiting for a raid, or going out on a pretty long expedition without a source of entertainment. Now we have 4 mushes to make, and some of those have a couple of options. All of these result in a stack of 5, similarly to how you make wort in batches of 5. You'll be able to make tequila either from prickly pear and insect meat, or agave and insect meat. Tequila ends up being a little bit more expensive as it's using 50 raw ingredients for 5, compared to say vodka, that only needs 25 potatoes to make 5 mash, or gin that needs 25 berries to make 5 mush. The other only one with an option is whiskey. This can either be made from 25 corn or 20 flour. So if you want a fully stocked drinks cabinet, you're going to need to go wide on the crops that you're growing and find a reliable source of buggos for their juicy, delicious innards. With all of these drinks, even if you're using the processor framework, you're still going to need the very specific buildings to produce the alcohol. So we're going to get a gin still, a tequila barrel, a vodka drum and a whiskey cask setup, and start working on making some booze. They aren't all quite created equal though, and each wants to work within their own unique temperature range. although if you keep it well managed enough, there is a safe zone that has all of them happy. The whiskey cask is an expensive bitch. It needs 200 wood and 100 steel, being happy at 7 to 25 degrees. Tequila is super cheap and easy, taking only 30 wood and 10 steel and wanting to sit between 15 and 41. Vodka is even easier, needing just 40 wood, and it likes it a bit colder, sitting happiest between 3 and 20 degrees. Gin demands 40 steel and 1 component. Again, it favours a colder temperature, brewing best between 6 and 20 degrees. This means if you can reliably keep the room between 15 and 20, ideally around 18, everything is going to work as intended and tick over nicely. They just need to be totally filled before any brewing takes place, with a whiskey barrel holding 50 mash, given its massive size, and all others taking just 25. They also have different fermentation times too. Whiskey needs 12 days, tequila needs 10, vodka only needs 5, and gin takes a massive 15 days. You'll be happy to hear that none of the alcohols have a quality modifier though. Once they're done, they're done. That's it, ready to rock and roll.
Julian!
It isn't all you can do with the whiskey cask though. You're able to put 50 bottles of normal whiskey back into a cask, give it a further 12 days, and then it comes out as double-aged whiskey, offering a new buff and a more potent drink. As you'd expect from the quantity of ingredients you placed into the stills, you get 25 vodka, gin or tequila, whilst the whiskey barrel provides 50 bottles once complete. The mod page makes it sound like any light is going to spoil the process of whiskey brewing, but it isn't true. It only applies to high levels of light, such as a sun lamp or being left outdoors, but it's not likely that you're going to put something with a temperature tolerance outside anyway. As for the buffs, normal whiskey is going to be providing you a global work speed bonus. As you'd expect with any buff that comes in alongside alcohol though, you need to manage the upside against the downside of being battered, with the consciousness dip for being drunk significantly offsetting any potential gain you might have got if you hit the source a little too hard. Whiskey has a surprisingly safe dose interval of just 1.3 days though, so you're safe to drink this on a 2-day schedule without any consequences. The double-aged whiskey changes up the buff a bit and hits a lot harder than the standard whiskey did. Now you're getting 20% global work speed and 20% trade price improvement, but the alcohol is so potent that a single drink will knock you straight to tipsy and take around 3 or 4 hours to drop down to just warm before that buff is working meaningfully. What about vodka then? It's another relatively safe drink, providing that nice stage of alcohol warmth with its unique buff being melee accuracy that scales alongside drunkenness. Of course, the buff is 100% a trap, because whilst you might technically be swinging with far greater accuracy when you're totally shit-faced, the penalty to consciousness and manipulation is so severe that the target you're actually aiming for is only there because you're seeing double. In a similar vein, tequila offers that effect for aiming time instead, with being just a little bit tipsy helping you out with a 10% reduction, and you only need a single bottle on everyone in your ranged firing line to pump out a significantly chunky ranged buff. But if you push a little bit too far, the accuracy loss is going to be ruining that speedier aiming time, unless the incoming raid is so massive that even a missed shot is likely to hit something of value. Finally, the gin buff increases social impact in relation to how drunk you are, and again, social impact is ultimately a kind of meaningless stat, so it's mainly here for a chunky source of chemical consumption recreation, with it skirting just under the range of tipsy from a single bottle, providing an ideal duration of the alcohol warmth mood buff.
Everything mankind does is much, much easier if you're ever so slightly drunk.
So all of that is liquor brewing. Then we've got mixology to think about. This unlocks the bar, soda fountain and brandy distillery for structures, as well as a handful of new drinks to add to your ever-growing list. The bar carries over all recipes from the brewery, whilst also being able to mix the new cocktails, so if you aren't going to be making use of them, you can stick to using your brewery instead, saving yourself 150 wood, 30 steel and 2 components. Before we hop into the other buildings, we'll wrap up these new recipes at the bar. You'll have fruit juice, soda syrup, ambrosia mush, energy drinks and simple, fine, lavish and gourmet cocktails. And now we get into another part where the alcohol used to make these cocktails has more varying effects, similar to how condiments had unique effects for meals. Juices can be made from just about any fruit, with 1.25 nutrition needed to make 20 cartons. So it's another recipe where you're losing some of the nutrition in the process. The juice is shelf stable though, requires no refrigeration and works as a simple ingredient for cocktails and soda syrup, making it much easier to get yourself a nice refreshing beverage whenever you want.
You mean there's a better way?
The soda syrup is going to be required for the soda fountain, with 2 recipes to make it. You can either use 20 juice and 4 sugar, or 20 juice and 20 corn, giving you the high fructose syrup option instead. Almost everyone agrees though, the stuff that was made with real sugar tastes much better, although I'm not sure why they took out the yayo that the original recipe used. Ambrosia mush is your final spirit option, needing a whopping 50 units of ambrosia to create, which makes a single bucket of mush. Fortunately, only 1 dose is needed to fill the distillery, but we'll go over that in a little bit more detail shortly. Energy drinks are something you're going to need a soda fountain setup to make, as they need 25 soda, 25 coffee beans and 5 uranium to make 25 cans of the finest, non-kidney stone producing, entirely safe pick-me-ups. These drinks provide a +6 mood buff, as well as a 25% movement speed buff for 5 hours, with a safe dose interval of 1 a day. Just. This also gives a significant boost to the sleep bar, allowing a colonist that drank it to carry on working for a bit longer. Weirdly, this is something that tea and coffee don't provide, they just offset the buildup of tiredness for a while instead. The big downside to an energy drink is that when that move speed buff falls off, the affected colonist is instead hit with a 25% movement speed debuff for 2 hours. Drinking another energy drink doesn't remove the debuff either, it only offsets it with another buff. And consuming multiple energy drinks in rapid succession will show you that you're also developing toxic buildup from drinking these things. It's almost like mixing uranium into a drink was a really stupid idea. Then you've got your cocktails. These have a vast array of potential ingredients: juice, milk, teas, coffee, and any alcoholic beverages you can possibly create. Your simple cocktail uses a simple alcohol and 1 mixer. Fine uses up to a luxury alcohol and 2 mixers. Lavish needs a simple alcohol, a luxury alcohol, and 2 mixers, with gourmet then demanding a simple, luxury, mixer, and condiment to create. Your simple spirits are things like cider, vodka, and whiskey, with luxury being considered ambrandy, double-aged whiskey, gin, and tequila. Depending on the spirits used, you're going to get varying buffs. Beer can be used in place of a mixer, but it provides no meaningful impact to the drink. Ambrandy buffs mental break threshold. Whiskey and double-aged whiskey both buff shooting accuracy by 15%. Tequila increases animal taming chance by 15%. Vodka increases melee dodge chance by 20%. Gin will buff social impact. Cider will grant some toxic resistance, and if you're using settlers, Chemshine will make for an even bigger explosion when used in a cocktail.
Bada boom.
Big.
Big.
Yeah, big bada boom.
Big. Bada big boom.
Now, cocktails provide their own unique effect of consumed cocktail for 120 hours per drink. That increases the likelihood of the affected pawn experiencing an inspiration. Given the lengthy nature of the buff, it's extremely likely to get at least 1 proc over that time, providing a nice bit of value. So let's get that soda fountain down so we've got another mixer to use and can access the other drinks. The fountain only needs 40 steel and 1 component, consuming 50 watts of power. It can then be filled with soda syrup, processing 25 syrup into 25 bottles after 2 days, making it possibly the slowest dispenser ever. Likely made to work that way to discourage people from getting any value out of their bottomless drink purchase. These sodas provide a nice 10% manipulation bonus for 5 hours, alongside a +6 mood buff. That just leaves Ambrandy. Now, I didn't go into detail on this before because it's super involved and I hate it. I just hate it. I get what it exists for and it still boils my piss. So we made that 50 ambrosia into 1 bucket of mush. That mush then needs to be left somewhere to warm up and ripen into must. Once it becomes must, it can then be added into the distillery. This building costs 100 steel, 40 gold and 1 component, taking as much space as the whiskey cask does too, so it's a big old chunk. Now, this is one of those buildings that has a quality choice. Awful is going to take 15 days. Poor will then take a further 5 days on top of that. 10 more days to get up to normal. 15 more days for good, 20 more days for excellent, 25 more for masterwork, and 30 more days for legendary. That's 120 days to get to legendary Am Brandy. 2 years. You want to know how much you're going to get when you do eventually empty the distillery? 3 bottles. That's it. Now, Am Brandy isn't really intended to be consumed. It's there for its ridiculous trade value and insanely high beauty, as displaying bottles of Am Brandy dramatically increases the impressiveness of any room. The buff from consuming Am Brandy is the same as eating ambrosia, granting the warmth buff which increases mood. If high quality Am Brandy is consumed, it triggers a creative inspiration, if possible, and that's it. Now, I hate this because I've had bad experience with it, so I'm biased. Using Am Brandy to decorate a throne room, only to find it's gone missing a few days later because a colonist with a chemical interest gave absolutely zero fucks what I'd set their drug policy to and necked the entire bottle whenever they felt like it, removing 1,600 beauty from the room and instantly wiping out 2,500 silver worth of colony wealth. Yeah, this thing's an aneurysm waiting to happen. Now, before we hop over to covering teas and coffees from the final mod, there's a couple of other bits from Brewing. Cigarettes and cigars. As you'd expect, you're going to need to grow tobacco for this, but they're fantastic buffs to make use of. If you're a fan of taking the smoker trait in Zomboid, you're likely going to end up making smoker colonies in Rimworld. Just get ready for the potential downsides. Cigarettes can be made at either a crafting spot or a drug lab, but cigars require the lab to roll. So you have one option right from the start, with the other coming in a little bit later. 25 tobacco leaves allows you to make 5 cigarettes, with that word getting this video demonetized if I say it in UK slang. Smoking them gets you a 10% consciousness buff and 10% hunger rate offset for 12 hours, alongside a +7 mood buff, with the safe dose interval of a cig being 1 every 2 days, and they're extremely addictive. Cigars are a little bit more expensive to make, needing 25 tobacco and taking 5 gold per 5, as they're wrapped in a more refined manner. These have even better benefits though, with a 12-hour 20% consciousness buff and that 10% hunger rate offset, and the mood buff goes up to 15, and just a single day for the safe dose interval, making cigars a ridiculously potent and fairly accessible buff, as long as you're willing to keep a little stockpile of gold around to wrap them. There is a tweak mod that's available that recosts cigars if you want to use it. It removes the need for gold but makes them 3 times as expensive in tobacco, so you're going to be smoking some right fatties if you go by those values. As I'm sure everyone who grew up before vaping was a thing is aware, smoking's bad for your health. We saw adverts for it every day and every night. This is reflected in-game by tobacco usage increasing the risk of the colonists suffering carcinomas or asthma. So whilst you can smoke and even maintain tobacco addictions very easily in-game thanks to how straightforward tobacco is to grow, expect to have medical conditions popping up in your colony left, right and centre if everyone is partaking in the death sticks.
The sensation is wonderful. I have never experienced such a flavor. 500 cigarettes.
And that takes us to the very last bit of tech, the espresso machine. Say it with me, espresso. There is no X in that word. I have worked for too many years in the service industry taking orders from people that love the smell of their own farts and said this very simple word wrong repeatedly, even when you corrected it by saying their order back to them. Trust me, say it right and your baristas will take much better care of you. The espresso machine itself costs just 45 steel, 1 component, and takes 50 watts of power, so you can easily have a complete setup with all of the cooking expanded workstations, consuming less power than a single generator kicks out. It's very affordable. You're going to need this machine to access all of the unique tea and coffee combinations, as they won't be available at the bar or stove. You're also going to want to swap any existing tea and coffee bills over to this too, as it produces them a lot faster than a stove does. Not only that, it can reheat iced coffee back into hot coffee, because there's one small addition to these drinks that I didn't mention before. Iced coffee can help with heat stroke and hot coffee can ease hypothermia. Now, it's a pretty damn niche use for the drinks, but it is an option. So if you have a sudden cold snap and want to remove the risk of frostbite from one of your colonists, giving them a hot cup of java will fix it up lickety split. So let's go through these drinks really fast, as this rundown is now longer than a faction video, and we're talking about 17 different types of tea and coffee for Christ's sake. All of these recipes are going to take either 10 tea or 10 coffee and combine them with the other ingredient to make 10 cups of something new. You can use both hot or iced coffee for these recipes too, so don't worry if you've stored everything in the freezer between bills. Mint coffee takes 3 mint leaves and adds a 10% social impact boost on top of the normal coffee buff, with it also adding the consumed mint buff as well, so you're double dipping in social impact. Not sure if this is intended or a sneaky bonus. Dalgona coffee can be made by adding 3 scoops of sugar and results in a beverage that's beneficial to research speed, with a 10% buff. On top of that 15% movement boost from consuming sugar as well. Next is green tea, made by adding sugar to a cup of tea. That's definitely not how that works, but it's a video game, so I'm going to do my best to ignore it. Green tea provides more recreation than standard tea when consumed, with the same buff as normal. Mint tea needs 3 leaves to brew, and unlike mint coffee, it doesn't double dip on that social impact buff, making me think the coffee might be cheating these double effects somehow. Maybe because it's triggering the tolerance buildup and it carries an addiction chance? This adds 10% social impact to the standard tea effect. Masala chai blends some lovely spices in with tea, granting the standard tea buff and also reducing the severity of an infection on a colonist by 5%. Fantastic to keep around if you're using modded genies. Noon chai adds a sprinkle of salt into tea and creates a potent drink that immediately cures muscle parasites when consumed, on top of tea's normal effect. Another extremely useful drink to keep a handful of on standby. Espresso Romano combines coffee with 10 lemons worth of juice to make a potent treatment for gut worms, and whilst it won't remove it in a single go, just a few doses will soon cure it right up. This still provides the standard coffee buff as well. Lemon tea does exactly the same, just with tea instead of coffee, so if you don't want to go the route of risking a caffeine addiction, you can safely chug these instead. Earl Grey tea, the choice for a refined gent, combines tea and oranges to provide a 10% bonus to research speed, as there's always a way out of every box, a solution to every puzzle. It's just a matter of finding it. A latte is made by adding 10 units of milk to coffee, slightly increasing the potency of a standard coffee buff, with 18% global learning and 82% tiredness factor. How it's made the coffee more potent by diluting it with milk, I don't know. It's very easy to make a batch of mocha. You just need 3 bits of chocolate for 10 cups. It provides a significant boost over the recreation gain on a normal cup of coffee, with no change to the buff that it offers. Then you've got your Irish coffee, which is potentially one of the most potent and also expensive to make, mixing 5 bottles of whiskey to provide an extremely powerful buff. You're getting a stronger than normal coffee effect, though not quite as strong as a latte, with it adding 16% global work speed, plus you're getting an alcohol warmth for the mood buff, and a consumed whiskey cocktail buff for 15 additional shooting accuracy. If it's working as intended anyway. I might have ended up getting this mod nerfed by drawing attention to this. Apologies if that's the case. Cannibal coffee involves floating some small chunks of people in the drink, that way satisfying the need for human flesh when consumed, whilst offering no additional bonuses to the coffee buff. This is a great way of stretching a little meat a very long way, with just 10 units of long pork being able to make 10 full cannibal drinks. Black tea, which I take a massive issue with the naming of, involves adding milk to tea. Sarg, I know you watch these videos. For the love of God, swap the names of tea and black tea around. Adding milk to a drink does not make it black. It's the opposite of how it works. To make this even more confusing, by adding milk, the tea buff becomes stronger. None of this works. This drink is shambles. 7 out of 10, IGN. Yuan Yang is made by combining 10 cups of tea and 10 cups of coffee to make 10 cups of awesome, with a highly potent buff that combines the best of tea and coffee and can stack alongside them. So if you're willing to neck multiple cups back to back, you can seriously offset tiredness and buff global learning and immunity speed for 5 hours, as well as grabbing a triple mood buff. The last drink you can make is kombucha, which reduces the severity of the flu by 5% if it's present on the colonist. It provides the tea buff too, which goes some way in further assisting recovery. Which means the last remaining drink is the basic bitch one, a pumpkin spice latte. Compared to the other drinks, they're a lot cheaper, which is handy because the only way to get them is via traders. This coffee offers absolutely nothing different to a standard hot or cold one, but it does make for something cheap and cheerful that you can pick up if you've got a caffeine addict in your colony that needs a fix. And all of that is plants, cooking, brewing, and variety expanded. Your drug tab is going to be a horrifying mess to set up every time if you've got all of these mods enabled. So if you aren't already, I would massively recommend using safe storage, outfit, crafting, drug, and operation settings. This is going to let you set up a baseline once and apply it to every colony after that. It saves a fair chunk of time every time you start a new run doing all of those tedious bits of admin. This is another one of those player power mods, as all of the buffs that you're getting from this food and drink variety are helping you. The offset to this is going to be the explosion of colony wealth from all of the drinks, ingredients, and production chains, as well as the additional work and reliance on chefs and botanists in your colony. Honestly, not something I would want turned on every single run, because it's a massive amount of lines added to your stockpile and bill management, whilst it dilutes the pool of items that traders can turn up with by a crazy amount. If you're looking for something like Yayo or Go Juice, you'll be fuming when they turn up with 4 different bottles of alcohol and cigars instead. This mod is a perfect addition to hospitality focused colonies though, allowing you to run your very own Hell's Kitchen, providing a massive variety of meals, drinks and treats for guests, absolutely stacking their happiness bar and getting you a nice easy 5-star review. Thanks for watching folks. If you have any mods you'd like to see a full breakdown for, or suggestions of mods you'd like to see covered, feel free to leave them in the comments, I might get around to them. I'll be back again soon with another Rimworld mod rundown. Wherever you are in the world, enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon or evening. Take care.